here's kind of how I would diagram this database. You'll remember that I previously did a diagram with this. Let me go pull that one up there. So previously when we did this with MySQL, there it is. So it kind of looked like this, right? So we had a teacher table, we had a course table, we had a course student, we had a student, we had assignments, and we had assignment grades, right? So we had to split it up that way. And that was really the only option when we're dealing with SQL because we have to have scalar values, right? We have to have scalar values for all of our fields. But when we're dealing with Mongo, we have some more options, right? Because we can nest documents as well as we're able to nest arrays. We can take a different approach to that diagram, okay? So my diagram for Mongo looks a little bit different. You'll notice that there's a few more things on it, but there's also a few less things on it, okay? So let's kind of start from the top. I'll kind of explain how this operates and how I've written this, okay? So starting from the top left, you'll see that there is a teacher collection, okay? Or you could say that's the teacher's collection. Up to you whether you want to use singular or plural. I'm fine with either one. In fact, I usually end up using plural for the names of my collections. It's just easier on the diagram to use the singular form. Okay, so we got the teacher. That one's pretty self-explanatory. You know, I've got the name of the field, and you'll notice there's a colon and then the type of the field. So I'm including not just the name of that field, but also what type is it, because that's really important, especially when we're dealing with Mongo and it's kind of schemaless. We're not defining the types in the database itself. So I need to know what type I would expect. And so that's a good way for me to document it. I've got the given name, I've got the phone number, family name, phone number, email, Discord, GitHub, all those kind of things. I've said those are strings. I haven't said in there whether, honestly, I haven't said in there whether those are optional or required. That can sometimes be a useful thing to document as far as knowing which things are optional, but your default expectation should be that everything in Mongo is optional, okay? So we can say, well, hey, there's a place for a GitHub account. Maybe not everybody has a GitHub account. There's a place for a Discord. Maybe not everybody has a Discord, but at least there's a place to store it, and I know what I'm going to call that field. Cool? Also in there, you'll notice the last item in there is I've got a courses field that is type teacher course brackets, right? So the brackets meaning that this is an array. So I'm specifically saying that this is an array of objects. That's how I document this. That's kind of following the same thing you would do with C#, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to define a class, and it's an array of that class. Cool? So attached down below, you'll see I've created another little UML diagram called teacher course. Okay. Now to help clarify and keep things straight, you'll notice I've used some annotations at the top of these boxes, subdocument and document. So you can see some of these are documents and some of these are subdocuments. Okay. And the way I've named all the subdocuments is I said, hey, take the name of the document and append something. So like teacher underscore course. Okay. So if I was going to model this in C#, I need every one of these boxes would be a class. Does that make sense? So in total here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 classes. I actually do have 10 classes if I was going to fully model this out. Okay? So in search of the teacher course, I'm saying, what does that have? What does that subdocument have? So I'm using underscore ID, that's the object key. I'm marking that as a foreign key because it refers over to the course table. It's worth noting here, I just called it underscore ID. I didn't call it course ID. The reason I'm doing that is it does kind of make things a little bit easier because then I don't have to switch names as I'm moving around. So I'm saying, hey, if I want to get to this, it would be inside of a course object, basically, and it's called underscore ID. It doesn't change, right? The name doesn't change. Similarly, I've got name, I've got semester, and I've got student count, right? The part of the beauty of putting all this stuff inside of an object is you don't have to give it a special name because it's over in some other place. Does that make sense? I don't have to rename it and call it student name, course name, and course semester, etc. I'm just putting it in an object, and what I'm doing here as well is I'm kind of choosing to duplicate some of the data, right? In fact, I don't even have to have this course list at all. That's entirely optional. That whole array is duplicated data because it exists somewhere else. I'm doing this because of kind of what you saw in the videos, is it makes querying the data faster. It means that if I want to have a page, say, hey, I have a page for the teacher, and he can just go to that page and see the courses that he's part of, I can generate that very quickly without having to look up data from other tables. Yeah. What's up? Okay. So that's what we're doing here. So I'm taking the name, the semester, and the number of students that are part of that course. That's all duplicated data, but it's helpful because if I want to show that list, that profile picture, or profile for this teacher, this is basically what I want, right? I want to know what semester it's part of, I want to know what course it's part of, and I know how many students. I can also use this data not just for the profile, but if you look inside Ranken, you'll know you have kind of a sidebar that shows you what courses you're part of, right? So I can also use this information to very quickly populate that sidebar, because I just say, oh, you're logged in as teacher X, teacher Paul Smith, and I can get all my courses very quickly rather than having to look at and do complicated courses. Okay? Same thing works on the student side, right? So here, I pulled in the student count because, well, it's helpful to know how many students I have. Great. Over on the student side, it's kind of a similar idea. It's almost identical, in fact, same kind of fields. But you'll notice now I have attached to it, I've got a field named courses, but it's an array of student course instead. It's not teacher course, it's student course, okay? So in the student course, I have the ID, I probably should have the semester in there too, but I have the ID of the course, I have the name of the course, and I have a grade, right? So here I can quickly look at what is my grade, my current grade in my course. Notice that's different from what's over here. As a teacher, I care about how many students I have more, and I don't really have a grade for myself, but over here, you don't really care how many students are in there as much as you care what your grade is. So it's optimized for a different audience. Does that make sense? So I'm optimizing for the audience that's going to use that data. What do I want to query? What is important to me? And so that's what you're going to have to think about. What data is worth duplicating for the audience that you're duplicating it for. Okay? Let's look at the course. Okay, so within the course, I've got some stuff that's kind of obvious, and some of the stuff is maybe not as obvious. So I've got the name of the course, which is a string. I've got the semester, which is a string. And then I've got this days a week thing, right? What type is that days a week?
It's an array.
It's an array of strings. Why is that helpful to me?
It's already split up in parts.
Already split up in parts. So I can have an array that's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Which is actually very helpful to me, isn't something I could do with MySQL, right? I had to come up with some complicated scheme to figure out how to represent the days of the week that course is part of, right? And so you might say, well, okay, well, we've got 7 days. I need to assign a letter. I think that's what I did with some of you. We assigned a letter to each day. And so I said, well, let's make a string that's of varchar 7, and we'll figure out this complicated scheme to save the data, but then it makes it much less efficient anytime you need to query the data, right? So being able to put a string there really, really helps, right? Really is really helpful as a way to store that data instead. So that's what I'm doing. The start time I'm just storing as a string. The end time I'm just storing as a string. Okay. In the world of MySQL, remember we stored those as times, right? So in Mongo, we do have a date type, namely we have a date time, type that we can use to store dates and times, but Mongo does not have just a separate date type or a separate time type. Does that make sense? So in terms of being able to store times, I end up needing to store them as strings. Okay? So that's kind of what's happening there. Beneath that, then we have a few things. So you'll see I have teachers, which is an array, and I have students, which is an array. Okay? Now there's a choice kind of in there. Obviously, we need to have courses be able to have multiple students, because it's very rare that you have a course that only has one student. Only has one student, you basically call that a tutoring session. That's not really a course as much as it is a tutoring session. If we for some reason want to have multiple teachers, this allows me to do it. So I'm going ahead, rather than saying there's a single teacher, let's say it's an array of teachers. You know, that's one of those things that's kind of makes more sense to plan ahead for. You know, if you can plan ahead for things like that, that's like, well, it's probably not going to happen. Most courses will have one teacher, but it may happen at some point in the future, so let's just prepare ourselves for it. Including for just simple scenarios where, hey, on Friday I have to take the day off, and so Evan's the other teacher because he's covering on those days. Does that make sense? So even just for simple cases like that, where you have a teacher that's going to be out some days, it's helpful to be able to have multiple teachers on the course. Okay? So same idea. You'll see down here, you know, that's a document. I've got sub-documents listed. So I've got a course teacher and I've got a course student, which kind of reflects the data that I need if I'm, say, I want to look at a course, right? If I want a page that just shows me the course, I want all the information to quickly generate that course without doing lookups into other tables. Make sense? So in terms of the teacher, I have not just their ID, I have their given name, I have their family name, their phone number, the email, the Discord, the GitHub, and their office hours. So I have a bunch of information that actually, honestly, is duplicated because it does exist over in the teacher table. So I want to be able to access it quicker. The other benefit of duplicating the data here, in fact, is if for some reason I need to decide that I'm using a different Discord account for different classes, I can now use a different Discord account for different classes because it's per class, or different contact information, right? So maybe you're teaching an evening class, maybe you're teaching a morning class, and the best way to get a hold of you might be different from class to class to class. So that gives me that flexibility to change it. And also office hours is obviously something that may change from course to course. Cool? So those are things that are actually intentionally duplicated. Does that make sense? There's some value to duplicating it beyond just being efficient. It actually could be different from course to course. With students, I've got the ID of them. But you also notice I have their given name and their family name, so I can quickly look up that data, right? I don't have to go over to the student table to get their name. It's already there. Make sense? Part of the benefit of duplicating this data is this data, as it turns out, doesn't change very often, right? If I look at everything here on course teacher, you're going to find that basically you set up the course once at the beginning of the semester, you fill in all that data in. It's unlikely that that data is going to change anytime afterward. So duplicating the data, no big deal, right? Similarly, it's very rare that some student changes their name in the middle of a semester. Does that make sense? They might change it. It does happen, but I don't need to change historic classes, right? Let's say you've taken a class last fall and you change your name. Well, I don't necessarily need to change your name in that old course. I just change it in this current course, right? So again, duplicating the data is actually not that big a deal. Make sense? Change is rare, and you don't necessarily want to update all the data. So then going down to assignments. Okay, so assignments here, we have something kind of interesting happening. Note my annotations here. So I'm saying, well, there could be quite a few assignments. right? There is an upper bound, right? It's not completely unbounded, right? So one of the patterns that you heard about in the video series is you want to avoid large unbounded arrays, right? You want to avoid arrays that are unbounded, that continue growing without an end. If I look at these arrays, right, there are bounds on them, right? I'm saying, hey, teachers are typically part of 0 to 5 courses. They're teaching a small number of courses, so I can keep track of that. No big deal. Students are only part of so many courses. No big deal, right? So there's a bound on that, right? I can bound that, and I can say, well, at the end, it's not going to be that much. Teachers, I can say, well, there's 1 to 3 teachers. No big deal. 1 to 20 students, right? So there's bounds on those sizes which make the arrays kind of small. In fact, like days of the week, what's the maximum number of days of the week that this course could be held on? Probably 5, realistically 7, right? There are no 7-day courses, but 5 is kind of there is a max either way, right? So all of those are limited. Does that make sense? There's a tight bound on it. That doesn't hold as much with assignments. There is a bound, right? There is an upper limit to how many assignments you can give, but there are a lot more assignments than everything else. Does that make sense? That's one side of things. There's a lot more assignments. So I'm breaking this out. I'm not keeping the assignments inside of the course to avoid the issues when we're talking about massive arrays. Does that make sense? That's why I'm breaking that out. The other reason I'm breaking them out is because of the key rule that we talked about. What's the main driving rule that the video series talked about? What's the main driving rule in Mongo? She said it over and over again. There's a phrase she repeated. Exactly, right? So data that's accessed together should be stored together. And remember, that's different than data that's related should be stored together, which isn't true, right? So the assignments are related to the course, but it turns out they're generally not accessed together. Okay? There's a lot of cases where I may want to get the course, and I don't want to see the assignments associated with it. So for instance, I'm looking at, all of the course. If I'm looking for a course, I don't need to look at all the assignment data if I'm just trying to find, Jeff Scott's copy of AWG 111, right? I don't need that information. Or plenty of cases where I may look at the information for the course and not need that. So there's a lot of cases where this is related but not accessed at the same time. Does that make sense? I'm grouping the data here together because frequently I do want to see the courses that the teacher's part of with the teacher. I want to see the courses that the student's part of with the student. I want to see which teacher and courses go with the student, go with the course all the time, right? So I'm putting data that's commonly accessed together. Okay. So assignments are broken up, right? I'm doing that to avoid a few of those anti-patterns. So I broke out the assignments. In the assignment, I've got an ID for the assignment. I've got a name for the assignment, and I've got a due date. Now, the due date, you'll notice, is typed date because it is actually a date plus time, right? So there would be acceptable for me to use that type. You'll notice I have a course and I have a grades, right? So notice with course is singular, right? It's not an array because your assignment only belongs to one course. It could never belong to one. Similarly, your grades is an array because you have multiple students in that course. Make sense? Okay. So within the assignment, I have a link back to the course and I have a link back to the assignment that's part of it. Doing the same subdocument thing. So I've got, okay, here's the assignment grade, assignment course thing. I've only got the ID of the course. Okay, I've only got the ID of the One of the things you'll notice here is I chose to duplicate a lot less data down on the assignment than I chose to duplicate on the documents above. Here I chose to these three main documents, teachers and courses and students, I decided to duplicate a lot of data, but I didn't duplicate it down here. Okay. So one of the reasons I didn't do that, I didn't say pull down the course name here, because it turns out I could very quickly say, hey, I want a course and all its assignments. Well, I'll make one query to go find the course by ID, and I'll go find all the assignments with that course ID. So the work needed to query and find the course information turns out actually to be relatively minimal. So duplicating the data actually turns out to be more costly than it is valuable down in this case. Does that make sense? Because I can get all the data that I'm not duplicating simply by asking for the course. Okay? Which means I have to do two finds, put it together. I don't have to do a lookup, but I've got to do two finds. That's okay in terms of performance. Okay? So in here, I've got just what course it goes to. I can just query that course. Within the grades, I've got what's the student ID, when did they submit it, which is a date, and what grade did they get, which is a number. Right? So here I've got that minimal information that I don't have stored anywhere else. I don't have stored, when did they submit it, or what grade did they get. It doesn't appear anywhere else. It just appears down. Okay? Questions? Does that make sense in terms of ERD, in terms of schema?
Why do you choose string data types for the session start and end times within the course?
Within the course? So because there's no time type in Mongo or in JavaScript. There's a date type, but no, basically it's called date, but it's really a date type, right? There's no separate date type and no separate time type, unfortunately, in JavaScript. I wish that there was, but there isn't. So that turns out to be really my only option. Cool. And basically for what I'm going to use it for, what I would use it for, that would enable me to do whatever queries I need to do. In fact, most of the time I'm just going to be showing that data, not searching in terms of the start and end. So, or I could do things like, hey, have a certain end time. If we're talking about technical courses, really, you only have two start times to choose from, 8:05 or 12:35. So it's very easy to put up make that a drop down. Okay, so that's kind of looking at the schema.